Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Jerry Knowles of the 124th Legislative District. I represent a portion of Berks as well as Schuylkill counties. Each year, the legislature has the challenge and responsibility to pass a spending plan for the Commonwealth. The starting point is the governor's address in February, and the process ends with the budget being signed on or before June 30th. Joining me today is House Majority Whip Representative Stan Saylor. Representative Saylor is here to discuss the budget process and specific issues that will affect this year's plan. Representative Saylor, thank you and welcome. Welcome.
Glad to be here, Jerry. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Stan, if we could start off just by you talking a little bit about yourself, your experience, your district.
Sure. My background is I was a small businessman before I was elected to the General Assembly. Early on, worked my way through college by working in construction. So after I got out of college, I was involved in a number of things of real estate and building. Eventually started my own company with my father and got elected to the legislature. I've had a great interest in issues that affecting jobs and business. In fact, that's really why I ran for the legislature, is because I think as a young man, I feel that Pennsylvania was a dying state. If you were old, this was a great place to be, but if you were a young person coming out of college and looking for jobs, it wasn't the best place necessarily to be to get a good quality job, a family-sustaining job as such. So I ran to the legislature to try and help change that, and I think we're making some progress under this governor and this Republican-controlled legislature. Really, what I'd like to say is that I think that we, as a General Assembly, yourself and I, have been working to change the economy of Pennsylvania. I think so often people look at politicians as, well, they're just there to do day-to-day little things. But I think what we do day and day is important, that we are looking out for the children and our grandchildren of the future and where we leave this state as politicians. And so it is critical we're doing. We're seeing a lot of new improvements in Pennsylvania, which is what has excited me about being in the legislature right now, is that finally this state legislature is a more open process. With open records laws, we are now making legislation that requires every check written in this Commonwealth to be seen by the public. If they really want to get bored, they can look at every check written out of the state treasury. We're seeing, here at the state legislature, legislators paying for their health insurance. We're seeing the Republicans have done away with state cars for the House members. So we're truly trying to change where the state comes from, at the same time improve our economy.
And you know, I really do, we're going to get into some of these issues, but many people, the whip, what is the whip and what does he do?
Well, it's funny because the term comes from the British Parliament, of course. My job as whip is, of course, to make sure that members are on the House floor, to put forward a policy on different legislation that we as the Republican caucus want to move forward on, that we have the votes to pass that legislation. To run the floor when the majority leader is not there. It's my job to run the floor. Some legislators, legislatures across the country would call the position assistant floor leader or assistant majority leader. Here in Pennsylvania, we use the old British term of whip, and of course it's been interesting because I've gotten gifts of anything from bull whips to buggy whips to crops as people who like to have fun with my title. But really it is to work with the members to make sure that legislation moves through smoothly and that the services of the Republican caucus are utilized by our members to help them pass legislation that affect them in their local districts.
Well, let me tell you that you do a good job, and I've told people, and I mean this sincerely, I worked for the whip at one time. I worked for Dave Argel, and the whip's job is a tough job, and I thank you for taking it on, and I also thank you for the good job that you're doing. Stan, some of the challenges, and boy, we are facing challenges in this upcoming session. I mean, you know, we talk about the budget, which is always a challenge, privatization, pensions, transportation, all big issues. But let's just start a little bit by talking about our $28.4 billion budget that has been proposed by the governor.
Well, the governor come forward with a budget investing even more money in public education than we have. You know, and I think this governor has gotten a bum rap when it comes to education funding. Believe it or not, there have been a lot of people who have told lies out there telling the public that this Republican legislature and Governor Tom Corbett cut public education funding. The truth of the matter is the only time that public education has been cut were 2 years under Governor Rendell when he cut public education funding. Since then, Governor Corbett has continuing to raise public education funding by hundreds of millions of dollars, as he's doing here for the third year in a row. So when people talk about education cuts, that came under Governor Rendell. That did not come under Governor Corbett or the Republican legislature. Since we've been involved, I think we as Republican legislators have really focused on education, from early childhood learning to the area of K through 12. I think we as Republicans think that's where our economic balance is. A lot of times people forget that a good educated youth coming out of our high schools and going off to college provide us why companies want to locate in your particular state and here in Pennsylvania. And I think we have some of the finest schools, some of the finest higher learning institutions in our nation, and if not in the world, when you look at them. And I'm not going to name them, but everybody knows some of the fine universities we have here and colleges. So this budget will focus on education. We'll be focusing as well on making sure that we're economically, a budget that's economically viable. Everybody wants to spend more money. Nobody ever likes to cut programs, or at least not their program anyway. But what we're trying to do, I think, here in the General Assembly, you and I and the Republican caucus and Governor Corbett, is look at programs that are outdated, that are not working for the taxpayers of Pennsylvania, and look at changes that either need to be made in a program or elimination of those programs. So that's why it's always difficult. Anytime you go to eliminate, somebody believes that, well, why are you doing away with it? Somebody's either getting laid off because you're ending a program, or because somebody along the line, you know, that they were the one who instituted the program. My worst statement I hate to hear from anybody, whether it's an employee or any people, is, well, we've done it that way for 20 years. Why should we change it? And the truth is, we're politicians. Our job is to look out for the taxpayers of Pennsylvania and to the future, not just to today. And I think that yourself, and I know when you and I have had numerous conversations in the past in the House floor as well as in my office or your office, is we're always talking about what can we do to change Pennsylvania for the better. And that's what it is. You've got to look at every program. No program is exempt from either being cut or changed, simply because that is our responsibility. And that's how we answer to our voters and taxpayers back home.
And I think, Stan, when we, I constantly remind people of this. When you take our budget and when you look at education, welfare, and corrections, it accounts for like 86% of the budget. The remaining 14%, if I'm doing the math right, takes care of all the other things. So when people say, why do you guys focus so much on education and welfare? Because that's where the money is. That's where we need to go to they made it sound like, in the past budget, they made it sound like the world was going to come to an end. Well, the world didn't come to an end.
Right.
Our kids are still getting educated. Teachers are still doing their job. And, you know, throwing money at a problem is not always the answer.
No, and if you know, last year, this General Assembly passed teacher evaluations. And not only do we evaluate teachers in the state now, but we're evaluating guidance counselors. We're evaluating principals as well. It's important, if you're going to have a good school district, that everybody performs. It's not just about teachers, it's about the principals, the guidance counselors. I mean, students who are looking to go on to college or another institution, whether it's a trade school or whatever, they need to have that guidance, and we need to make sure that everybody in a school district is performing at their best levels and serving the taxpayers. You know, many of yours and my constituents constantly complain about property taxes. What they're getting for their dollars is they expect quality. I mean, I don't think anybody's looking for a free ride out there, but what they are looking for is, if I'm going to pay $1 to state government or to my school district or my township or whoever, I want to see results for the dollars I'm paying.
You know, Stan, we get our report card every 2 years.
We do.
You know, we have to go before our constituents, and we've got to make our point that we're doing our job and representing them well here in Harrisburg and back home. And I see no reason why we shouldn't hold these other people accountable. It makes perfect sense to me. How about the welfare line item? I think, you know, there's a misconception out there that that they try to paint us as being the bad guys. And I tell people, I don't want to hurt a senior citizen. I don't want to hurt anybody who genuinely needs help.
Right.
people with special needs, our senior citizens. We're looking for the guy that's walking into the mini mart with 2 access cards, neither of which is in his name, and people who are scamming the system.
Right. And I don't know if I should use this label, but I'm going to use it. The liberals criticize us a lot of times for not doing enough for people. The problem is we can't get those same individuals who criticize us for not doing enough to help us reform welfare, to make it serve those who are either disabled or senior citizens. You know, the problem is we're spending so much money on fraud and waste in the welfare system. You know, I think there was a national study about 5-6 years ago that something like 50 cents on every dollar that goes into welfare goes into the administration of it. Well, if you're a charity and 50% of your money you're collecting as a charity is being wasted on administration, you do not get licensed in a lot of states, nor in Pennsylvania. Here in Pennsylvania, we have asked the federal government to give us the ability to better manage our welfare program. For instance, on food stamps, we see people buying cases and cases of soda. I mean, it's nothing for somebody to walk into a store tomorrow with their food stamp card and buy 35 cases of soda, and they do. 22 cases, or 10 cases, or 5 cases of energy drink. Bags and cases of pretzels and chips. And what they do is these people go out, they sell it to the bars or taverns, or try to, and they take that money and go buy beer or liquor or drugs. And we've asked the federal government, and they've turned us down, to eliminate the ability on food stamps to buy those kind of items. I don't care what kind of meat you buy or any healthy foods. The whole point of the food stamp program is to buy nutritional food for your family, not to buy food that you can sell to some tavern or somebody else and get cash for it and then go buy drugs and alcohol. The children of our state deserve better from their parents who are on welfare. They deserve good quality food. We have a state program called WIC for single mothers. That program does not allow those kind of things. Our state program, our state dollars that we put into that program can only be used for nutritional food. And we've simply asked the federal government to allow us to do the same thing with the food stamp program. And if we're going to root out fraud and if we're going to hold people accountable, the state of Pennsylvania has to have the flexibility. I know we're getting criticized because we're not willing to expand welfare. Well, why would you expand something that when you're not getting help from the federal government to clean up the fraud and waste in it now? It just makes no sense for us to take your taxpayers or my taxpayers' dollars and spend it on something that is continuing to be not utilized to the best interest of Pennsylvanians.
And I tell people that we are trying to be good guardians of their money. I mean, the bottom line is that those dollars that are being stolen,
right,
and the abuse of the system, there are people out there who genuinely need help that are being deprived of that help. I mean, we're just looking to get and believe me, Stan, I know that that efforts are being made by by the governor to try to get this, but I am still not convinced that it's under control. I constantly hear about this,
right,
at my breakfast.
Well, and Jerry, you know, when you look at today what we're doing in our schools, we're providing breakfast and lunches for a lot of these children, free lunches and breakfasts. And a lot of these kids who are getting that, their parents are getting food stamp dollars. So what it is, it's the lack of responsibility by the parents to make sure that their children are getting fed at home, even though they're getting the dollars. Now, it's like you said, we'd love to increase some of the funding for some of the disabled and senior citizens, but you can't do that if you're continuing to eat up a lot of those dollars in fraud and waste. So we really need the federal government to start giving, not just Pennsylvania, but all states, the ability to deal with those kind of issues that best suit their state and their taxpayers, because every state's a little different.
Stan, let's talk a little bit about privatization of the LCB. I know that I tell my good friend Dave Argo, we did our job, now it's time for you to do your job. So what about privatization?
Well, you know, I think some people try to make it bad about the fact, well, the state liquor store employees are going to lose their positions. Well, some will be hired by these other companies, and maybe all would be. You know, I can't predict that far. But I have friends and I have family members who work as employees. So it's not that I want to just throw 5,000 people out of work. What it is we as a state should not be in competition with the private sector in selling liquor. You can't say, I'm going to fine you for this, and then also go sell the product and say, buy more vodka at Christmas time, or buy more whiskey, or whatever it is, the program, or buy more wine. You just can't. How do you do that? When you're enforcing the DUI laws, you're also going in, and we know that some of our state store employees have, not many, but some have sold to minors. So the argument, well, if you privatize it, oh, there's going to be more minors buy it. The requirements under this legislation is that every person who buys those liquors now will have to have a card swipe. So it's not easy to doctor those kind of things. So the program that has been set up and passed on to the Senate by us in the House, I think is a responsible legislation that we've sent over there. It's a compromise. I hope that the Senate will, maybe they'll change it a little bit and send it back to us and get it to the governor's desk. But it's something that it's long overdue. We haven't changed the liquor laws really since 1933, I believe, in this state as far as the sales. That's a long time, 80 years that we have not done anything to really change it. Well, 48 other states sell liquor privately, and they enforce their laws very stringently, and it has worked. So I think it's a good thing for Pennsylvania. It will work very well for the consumer. I hear from my constituents all the time that they'd like to buy this or that in the grocery store or have it more convenient hours and stuff. And the liquor stores just are not designed to do that. Their locations aren't necessarily always convenient to your taxpayers or me.
Stan, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I want to talk, maybe we'll talk more about the transportation, about our pension problem, and then maybe we'll get into something that I know is near and dear to you, and that is the natural gas powered vehicles. So we'll talk about that shortly. Legislative report will return in a moment.
Did you know that the state capitol is not only the epicenter of the Commonwealth's governing bodies, but was once home to 390 preserved Civil War flags? During the war, it was customary for each state to furnish their regiments in battle with flags representing their contribution to the Union Army. After the war, Pennsylvania's military department was responsible for collecting the flags, and in 1872, they were reverently housed in the Capitol. Following the completion of construction on the new Capitol building in 1914, the Civil War flags were moved to the Capitol Rotunda. They were kept untouched in custom-made flag cases until 1982, when the Capitol Preservation Committee initiated its Save the Flags project. Throughout the years, dust and long-term vertical display of the flags had begun to devastate the brittle silk fabric and painted designs. The flags were removed by local textile conservators and were repaired and preserved in storage units that protect the relics from light, dust, and excessive handling. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm State Representative Jerry Knowles, and my guest today is State Representative Stan Saylor, who is the Majority Whip in the House of Representatives. Again, Stan, thank you so much for taking time out to be with me today. I really appreciate you sharing the wealth of information, I think it's an exciting time to be in Harrisburg. It's a very challenging time, but yet it's an exciting time. And I want to thank you, Stan, because we're going to get into transportation a little bit here. And I want to thank you for attending my press conference on House Bill 220, which, as you know, deals with the money from the privatization going to roads and bridges. That's very important legislation to me, and you were kind enough to come and speak, and I thank you for that. So, talking about transportation, I think and I know Leader Terzai says this many, many times, we need to think about the $6.5 billion that we currently spend on transportation. We need to take a good, hard look at that. I think that we need to look at the creative, out-of-the-box stuff, private-public partnerships, the bundling of bridges. I think there's a number of things that we have to look at. But your opinion on transportation and on what direction we should take.
Well, I think transportation is a tough issue because anytime most of the money raised in Pennsylvania on transportation is raised through gas taxes, whether it's a tax on the oil companies or it's a tax at the pump. There's two different types of taxes there. Plus driver's license and registration fees. We're kind of a unique state that I don't know if a lot of people know, is that every dollar that's brought in through driver's license, registration, the gas tax, the oil taxes, cannot be spent for anything but transportation. It's kind of like in a locked box. So it's very limited. I think one of the things too that we as a lot of people who travel roads, we might complain a little bit about the road being roughed or a pothole, but a lot of times we really don't want to spend more money. And that's why I think Representative Terzai, who's the majority leader, has said we have to take a look at how we're spending current dollars as we move forward and what other changes need to be made. You know, there's proposals out there to eliminate the Turnpike Commission. You have a great proposal out there to use the money from the privatization of the liquor stores to put that in highway dollars. We also have the public-private partnerships, which is where a private business, excuse me, can come in, use private dollars, or even, you know, some union can use its pension fund, which we're seeing in other states and in Canada, in a place where they can build a highway and toll it. You know, whether it's a bridge or a highway over top of a current one, or it's adding lanes to the sides of current existing highways and tolling those. Those are the kind of things that we need to look at what best works for Pennsylvania, and I think you'll see some of the public-private partnerships develop here over the next few years. But I do think that as a taxpayer, a lot of times we sit there and say, well, you know, I don't want to do that. And of course, in this economy, it's tough. It's really tough because families are having a tough time paying their mortgages, paying their property taxes, paying their bills, period. But at some point, you have to face the fact is, if we have a bridge collapse and people die, that is a major problem, and then all of us get upset and say, well, why didn't we do this sooner? So what we're trying to be is more responsible, I think, here in the General Assembly, saying, let's take a look at how we're spending dollars now. Where can we get dollars, like your piece of legislation, to help us? Representative Terzai and others have discussed the issue of the Turnpike. Should that be included? Should it be a separate bill? But I think highway funding is something that's critical. Remember also that our highways are about creating jobs and economic development. A good highway system will mean for us a system where people want to come and locate here because they can get their goods to any market across our nation. Pennsylvania is very well located because we have the Port of Philadelphia. And actually to the south of us, we have the Port of Baltimore, which is in the state of Maryland. So shipping, a lot of shipping, probably about 80% of all tractor-trailer traffic in the northeast part of this country go through Pennsylvania. So we have to take a look at that and the responsibility we have as well as to how we can best provide additional dollars to improve our highways.
And Stan, like many of my conservative colleagues in the caucus, as you, I'm entering this discussion with an open mind, but I need to be convinced that each and every dollar is being spent properly. You know, it's very important to me, and I want to make perfectly clear that my legislation, you know, whether it be $1 billion or whether it be $750 million, I don't view that as being the cure-all. I realize that there are other things that will need to be done. But the last thing that we should do is to raise fees and to raise, because you know, the people that I represent are struggling.
Right.
And, you know, one of the things that you know, it's one of those things that everybody says, yeah, that's a good idea, but I mean, part of the plan is a $100 additional surcharge on moving violations. Now, everybody says, well, that sounds good to me until Grandpa's going down the road and Junior's in the back carrying on, and maybe he does a California stop and goes through a stop sign, and that stop sign violation, which currently somewhere around $105, $110, all of a sudden becomes $210. I mean, the people that I represent, that's a big chunk out of their paycheck. And that's why I say, you know, we need to look at this stuff very carefully before we, before.
Absolutely, Jerry. I mean, when you think about the $6.5 billion we spend on highways today, and we have to look at, are we utilizing those dollars in a proper way? For instance, you know, if I'm going to vote for a transportation funding bill, whatever the makeup is of it, I've got to look and see how my region economically is going to benefit, how my constituents are going to benefit. In a transportation bill that passes, in all honesty, doesn't mean that every part of the state benefits equally and fairly from it. Simply because if you're sitting in, and I use this because I have relatives sitting in Potter County, Potter County has, in most cases, maybe more deer than it has people. But the highway up there are fairly well because they don't have the heavy traffic that you might see in Berks County. Schuylkill County is more of a rural county, so they may not benefit from it. So each legislator has to sit there and look as to the benefit to their own community by voting for this. And I think sometimes people say, well, why don't everybody just vote for this? And this is an issue that's not just Republican or Democrat versus one versus the other, or liberal versus conservative. It truly is about how does my region, how do my taxpayers benefit from raising the gas tax or a driver's license fee, and what should be increased. I mean, that's the debate that we're having now is, as you mentioned, should we raise the fines on Pennsylvania, which doesn't bring in a whole lot of money, by the way. You're raising the fines, and usually the most innocent people sometimes get hit by that because of little small moving violations that are just, you know, mere human error in some cases. Should we raise, you know, for the senior citizen? There's talk of raising the driver's registration fees as high as $72 or $100 possibly every 2 to 3 years or whatever. What impact does that have on your mother, my mother, senior citizens across this state? So I think the debate first we have to have is how much money we want to have, how do we raise those dollars, and what is the fair system to do that?
Stan, we're down to a few minutes, Ben. Before we finish up, I want to finish up on House Bill 301. I know legislation that is near and dear to you. Can you run us through that package of bills real quickly, because we only have a couple minutes?
Well, we have natural gas here. We have one of the largest supplies of natural gas in the world right here in Pennsylvania. And for years, politicians have talked about, for 40 years at least, when I was in college, about how they were going to get us off the dependence of foreign oil. I can remember when I was in college in 1973, you had to go to the gas station to get your gas based upon whether you had an even number on your end of your license plate or an odd number on the end of your license plate. No politicians have ever fulfilled that. And I think we in Pennsylvania have an opportunity to become the keystone state of this nation again by using our own resources to quit spending $400 billion a year to send it to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran in buying their oil. Let's keep it here in Pennsylvania. Let's keep it here in America. American-made gas right here. If we create competition for the oil companies, natural gas vehicles can lower the price of oil and diesel fuel that we buy at the stations, as well as clean up our air. Natural gas fueled vehicles, whether it's a car, pickup truck, van, garbage truck, a bus, lowers our greenhouse gases by 30%. For those, whether I'm not going to get into climate change, but if you believe there's a climate change, you truly want to clean up our greenhouse gases in this nation. And Pennsylvania has that opportunity to create a lot of jobs here and have an economic boom for Pennsylvania.
So what this legislation, and there's a package of bills, right?
There's a package of 9 bills that provide for mass transit conversion to natural gas, helping companies also convert. We're seeing Giant Foods, I'm using them maybe an advertisement here, but Giant Food is converting all their tractor trailers. And if you live in a small borough that has a state highway through it, you're seeing tractor trailers, trash trucks come through with the black smoke pouring out of their smokestacks. This is going to eliminate that. That's going to clean that up. You and I, a lot of us, I don't think Schuylkill County does, but Berks County, York County, we have stickers on our car every time we get inspected about emissions, and we're paying for that. These are kind of things that we can do away with, those kind of emission stickers, by cleaning up our air on our own, by using our own Pennsylvania, American-made natural gas in our vehicles.
You know, I want to thank you for what you do in terms of your leadership as our whip. I tell people that any position that you hold in leadership is always a challenge, and you do a good job at what you do. So thank you so much, Stan. I really appreciate
you for having
your
me.
time. That's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Jerry Knowles. If you need assistance with any state government matter, you can feel free to contact me at my local office or through my website, and that contact information will be shown in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for Legislative Report.